Prince William, heir to the British throne, the man who for the past 14 months has been quietly, methodically consolidating authority over the operational machinery of the crown while his father undergoes cancer treatment, has just made a move that sent shockwaves through every corridor of Buckingham Palace. Not a diplomatic suggestion, not a gentle nudge communicated through the usual back-channel whispers that the institution has perfected over centuries. He banned Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie, his own cousins, daughters of the king's brother, from attending Royal Ascot, one of the most prestigious, most publicly visible annual events on the royal calendar. An event their family has attended for generations, an event where the royals ride in horse-drawn carriages in front of the world's cameras. And he did not ask permission. He did not seek consensus. He issued the directive and expected it to stand. But here is where this story fractures into something far more dangerous than a guest list dispute, because King Charles, his own father, reversed him. Quietly, without announcement. Charles invited the sisters back, and when you understand what that reversal actually communicates, not about Ascot, not about horses, but about who truly commands this institution at this moment, it will fundamentally reshape how you see the power struggle unfolding inside the House of Windsor right now. Because William did not accept the reversal gracefully. He is, according to multiple sources, furious. And fury in a future king is not an emotion. It is a policy position. If you have not yet subscribed, do it now. Press subscribe and activate notifications, because what I am about to walk you through is not a single incident. It is the most consequential constitutional confrontation between a reigning monarch and his heir since the abdication crisis of 1936. Stay here. Every layer matters. Before I lay out exactly what happened, let me establish something essential. I have spent more than 2 decades tracking the internal mechanics of the British royal household. I maintain relationships within the palace apparatus and with senior figures in the British press corps, people who have watched the tension between William's camp and the King's office escalate to a level that nobody anticipated this rapidly. What unfolded did not emerge from nowhere. It is the direct consequence of the Andrew Mountbatten Windsor catastrophe, the arrest, the Epstein files, the stripping of titles, and the fundamental disagreement between father and son over how far the fallout should extend. The sources sharing this information with me have direct visibility into how decisions are made at the highest level of the institution, and what they are communicating, consistently and without contradiction, is this. William knew exactly what banning Beatrice and Eugenie would provoke. He calculated the risk, and he moved anyway. Because for William, the greater risk is inaction. To understand why Beatrice and Eugenie, and why Royal Ascot, you need to grasp 2 things that mainstream coverage has consistently failed to explain. First, the precise position these 2 women now occupy in the institutional hierarchy after their father's destruction. Second, what Royal Ascot represents as a piece of monarchical stagecraft. Without that context, this appears to be a family argument about a horse race. With it, it reveals itself as a calculated fight over the future architecture of the British crown. Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie are the daughters of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, the man formerly known as Prince Andrew, who on February 19, 2026, became the first senior British royal arrested and held in police custody in nearly 400 years. He was taken from his home on his 66th birthday, driven to a police station and questioned for almost 11 hours on suspicion of misconduct in public office. Specifically, allegations that he shared classified trade information with the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein during his tenure as Britain's trade envoy. His princely title had already been revoked, his military honours stripped. He was evicted from Royal Lodge, his 30-room residence near Windsor Castle, and relocated first to Wood Farm on the Sandringham estate, then to Marsh Farm, a renovated 5-bedroom property where, according to royal author Ian Lloyd, he now lives in what amounts to the most luxurious open prison in the country. Confined indoors, watching television, playing video games, receiving almost no visitors. The contrast between the man who once walked freely through the corridors of power and the man now sitting alone in a Norfolk farmhouse is, by any measure, devastating. But Andrew's personal collapse is not the story. The story is what his collapse did to everyone connected to him. Because in royal life, proximity is never neutral. It is either an asset or a liability. And when a figure at the center of a family network detonates, the blast radius does not stop at the individual. It reaches everyone who shares the surname, the bloodline, the institutional association. Beatrice and Eugenie did not choose their father. They did not participate in his decisions, but they carry his name, his legacy, and, in William's assessment, his reputational contamination. Royal Ascot is not merely a sporting occasion. It is one of the most carefully choreographed public displays of monarchical prestige in the British calendar. The royal procession, the carriages, the hats, the carefully curated visual narrative of family unity is broadcast globally. Every person in that carriage, every individual standing in the royal enclosure, communicates a message about who belongs at the centre of the institution and who does not. Historically, the York sisters have been fixtures at Ascot. Their presence was assumed, automatic, unquestioned, which is precisely why William chose it. You do not make a statement by excluding someone from an event nobody expected them to attend. You make a statement by removing them from a stage where their absence is impossible to ignore. The choice was architectural, not emotional. Here is what actually took place behind closed doors. In the weeks following Andrew's arrest, William's office began implementing what insiders describe as a hard-line containment strategy. The objective was straightforward. Every individual associated with the disgraced former prince needed to be distanced from the public-facing apparatus of the monarchy. No exceptions. No gradualism. William had reportedly pushed for Andrew's removal from royal life years before the titles were finally stripped, and he viewed Charles's initial reluctance to act as a strategic failure that had compounded the damage. When the question of Ascot arose in scheduling discussions, William's position was unambiguous. Beatrice and Eugenie should not attend. The optics were untenable. Their presence would visually reconnect the institution to the very scandal it was attempting to sever. His team communicated this as a directive, not a proposal. The sisters were, according to sources, completely blindsided. They had not anticipated being excluded from an event they considered part of their birthright. Eugenie had already begun distancing herself independently. She stepped down as patron of Anti-Slavery International, a charity she had supported for 7 years. Both sisters had kept a deliberately low profile since their father's arrest. They believed they were doing what the institution required. To then discover they had been formally barred from Ascot felt, to those around them, like punishment for a crime they did not commit. That emotional response is understandable, but it is also irrelevant to William's calculation, because William is not operating on emotional terrain. He is operating on institutional logic, and institutional logic does not make exceptions for innocence. It calculates exposure and eliminates it. What happened next is the critical inflection point. Charles intervened. Not publicly, not through a formal countermand. He simply invited the sisters back. quietly, through the private channels that a sovereign retains even when his operational authority has been substantially delegated. Royal author Andrew Lowney captured the confusion perfectly when he observed that the signals from the palace had become contradictory. Banned from Ascot, banned from Easter, and then suddenly invited again. Another commentator noted that Charles's reversal revealed a dominating instinct, a refusal to cede this particular decision to his son, regardless of the strategic rationale behind it. William's reaction was immediate and unambiguous. Sources describe him as fuming. One insider reported his complaint directly. Charles had made him look terrible by reversing course. For William, this was not a disagreement about a guest list. This was a direct challenge to the institutional authority he had been exercising with implicit royal consent for over a year. Every decision William had taken during Charles's health crisis, the streamlining, the boundary enforcement, the strategic distancing, had been permitted to stand. This was the first time the king reached across the divide and actively overruled his heir. And in doing so, Charles communicated something that William found deeply destabilizing: that the delegation of power is not the same as the transfer of power. That the king, even diminished, even ill, remains the king. The institutional significance cannot be overstated. William has been operating, by all credible accounts, as the de facto decision-maker on matters of royal protocol and public strategy for the better part of a year. The Andrew crisis accelerated that transfer. Poll after poll confirmed that William, with a 74% approval rating, commands public trust that significantly exceeds his father's 60%. He had the mandate, he had the operational control. And then, on this specific issue, the machinery pushed back. Not from outside, from above. From the one person whose authority William cannot publicly contest without creating a constitutional crisis of its own. The consequences cascade in multiple directions. First, Beatrice and Eugenie themselves. They are caught between a cousin who views them as collateral damage in an institutional triage operation and an uncle who offers protection, but whose protection itself sends the signal that the scandal's orbit still reaches the throne. Their allies describe their state as horrific limbo, years spent building respectable private lives only to find themselves dragged back into a controversy they had no part in creating. Reports suggest the sisters have begun discussing legal options, potentially consulting lawyers about their property rights, their titles, their future position within the institution. The possibility of the king's own nieces pursuing legal action against the crown would constitute a public relations catastrophe of historic proportions. Second, the Charles-William relationship. A father who overrules his son's institutional directive is not merely exercising sovereignty, he is drawing a boundary around his heir's ambition. And a son who openly expresses fury at being overruled is not merely venting frustration, he is signaling that he considers the boundary illegitimate. This is not a private family disagreement. This is two constitutional roles, sovereign and heir, colliding over the fundamental question of who governs the transition. Charles believes he governs it. William believes the transition is already functionally complete, and that Charles's intervention represents not authority, but interference. Both positions carry historical precedent. Neither can prevail without the other conceding ground. Third, the signal to the entire extended royal family and the British public. Edward and Sophie visited Andrew at Marsh Farm over Easter. Princess Anne has reportedly been checking in on her brother, even suggesting he could relocate to her estate at Gatcombe Park. These gestures of sibling loyalty, however private, run counter to the hard-line containment strategy William has been implementing. Each act of compassion toward Andrew creates a hairline fracture in the wall William is attempting to build between the institution and the scandal. William interprets these gestures not as family kindness, but as institutional indiscipline. And in the world he is constructing, the streamlined, accountable, modern monarchy he has described as royal with a small r, there is no room for sentimentality that compromises strategic clarity. I want to pause here. There are two young women at the centre of this confrontation who inherited their proximity to disaster through no decision of their own. Beatrice, 37, and Eugenie, 36, were born into a family that once represented the glamorous second tier of British royalty. Their father was the Queen's reputed favourite son. Their childhood was defined by privilege and protection. None of that insulated them from the choices their father made, or from the institutional machinery now reorganising itself around those choices. The exclusion bearing their names is not fundamentally about them. It is about what their continued presence represents. A visible, undeniable link between the crown and the worst scandal to engulf it in a century. At the same time, it would be dishonest to overlook that they have built independent lives, maintained their own reputations, and committed no transgression. There is no clean moral position here, only competing institutional imperatives and the human beings caught between them. Here is what comes next. William will not abandon his position. The frustration he has expressed is not a momentary reaction, it is a strategic posture. Sources close to his operation indicate that he views the Ascot reversal not as a defeat, but as information. He now understands, with clarity he perhaps lacked before, that Charles will selectively intervene to protect family connections, even when those interventions contradict the modernisation programme William considers essential. William's response will not be confrontational, it will be procedural. He will continue implementing his framework at every node where Charles's direct intervention is unlikely. Smaller events, staffing decisions, protocol adjustments, building the architecture of the next reign, one quiet decision at a time. The Ascot reversal taught him not to abandon the strategy, but to refine the execution. Charles will continue navigating between competing loyalties, to the institution, to his heir, to his brother's children, to his own diminishing political capital. Every act of leniency toward the York family spends a portion of that capital. Every reversal of William's decisions risks accelerating the narrative that the king is obstructing necessary reform. Charles understands, as his mother understood, that the monarchy survives by adaptation, but his instinct, inherited from decades of waiting, is that adaptation should be gradual, compassionate, considered. William's instinct is that the crisis has eliminated the luxury of gradualism. The monarchy, in William's analysis, faces an existential generational divide. Recent polling shows 39% of younger Britons believe the institution should be abolished entirely. Against that backdrop, every public association with scandal is not merely embarrassing, it is potentially terminal. So let me put this to you directly. Is William right to enforce a hard boundary around the fallout from his uncle's disgrace, even when that boundary severs connections between innocent family members and the institution they were born into? Or is Charles right to insist that the Crown's authority includes the prerogative of mercy, that protecting vulnerable relatives from institutional expulsion is not weakness, but precisely the kind of humanity that sustains public affection for the monarchy? These questions do not have clean answers. They do not resolve into a single correct position. They represent the fundamental tension at the heart of hereditary power, the collision between institutional survival and familial obligation, between strategic clarity and human compassion? Leave your answer in the comments. I read every one. If you have stayed through this entire analysis, you understand that what occurred is not an isolated incident over a horse racing event. It is the visible surface of the deepest internal power struggle the British monarchy has faced since Edward VIII surrendered the throne. Subscribe, hit the bell. The next video examines what William is planning for the structure of the coronation anniversary events, who stands where, whose image is included in the visual narrative of the next era, and whose is erased. It is explosive. Share this with everyone following this story. Because what April 2026 has established beyond any remaining doubt is that the constitution of the next royal order is being drafted in real time, and the author and the editor disagree on every fundamental paragraph. We will be here for every revision.